But it's my pleasure to introduce. Well, I don't need to introduce John Carpay. He is well known on this station. He's a freedom fighter and probably the most prominent lawyer with the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, which is always in the forefront of fighting for individual rights, constitutional freedoms, and your freedom. And it's John. I just got off the air with Katie Passivnay of the Universal Ostrich Farms, and there's another person who's being assaulted by the federal government. But there's so much going on right now in terms of attacks on personal freedom, individual rights, and this government. And this is really what I want to clarify at the beginning here, because I am utterly confused as to how many pieces of legislation this government is introducing. We have Bill C8, which I'm reading here, has had a first reading of June 18th, 2025, under the auspices of the Minister of Public Safety. We have Bill C9, which, of course, was introduced a couple of weeks ago, almost a couple of weeks ago, on September 19th. That's an act to amend the criminal code, hate propaganda, hate crime, and access to religious or cultural places. But I just want to play a clip from Sean Fraser, the Attorney General, Justice Minister, where I think he really muddies the water, because there could be three anti-free speech bills, three censorship bills. Let's just listen to him at a news conference.
You're talking about all this legislation that you're proposing this fall. How soon? Do we have a date we can expect to see some of that?
We should expect to see in the very near future the legislation dealing with intimidation and obstruction of those participating in their faith community, as well as hate crimes more broadly. Next month, we anticipate we will...
Oh, what happened here?
The legislation touching on bail and sentencing. Subsequently, during this parliamentary setting, depending on how efficiently the process of the House works and the collaboration of other parties to advance this legislation to get it done, we expect to see that third piece of legislation tabled later in this parliamentary setting that would deal with intimate partner violence, protecting kids online, and victims in the criminal justice process.
Great, thank you. And just following up on your comment about some faith-based community, there have been calls from Jewish groups to create nationwide safety zones because of a rise in hate and more security protection. Is that something you're looking at doing?
So I've had the opportunity to engage with the Jewish community over the course of the last number of months, most recently actually here in Edmonton, hosting a roundtable with members of the Jewish community locally in advance of our caucus meetings here. We have to make sure that we can do what's within our bailiwick, and that we also encourage other levels of government to take measures to improve public safety that are within theirs. Specifically, when you're talking about specific safety zones, regulating the ability of people to be in a particular place is not something that falls to the federal government. However, criminalizing morally culpable behavior that may take place in proximity to those institutions or elsewhere is something that we do have the authority to move forward with. Specifically, what you should expect to see is when we're dealing with those facilities that are meant to serve an identifiable group. Think of a synagogue for the Jewish community, a mosque, a church, but also community centers, schools, or specific places that are designed specifically for a given community. We want to add criminal provisions that would prohibit the obstruction of those facilities and the intimidation of the people seeking to use them. In addition, we are looking to establish new measures that would address hate more broadly, that is coupled with other criminal behavior that may take place regardless of its proximity to a particular faith-based institution.
I just want to kind of unbundle this, because we've got at least two pieces of legislation, but he referred to two pieces of legislation in the fall. So we've got Bill C8, as we said, which is the one that was introduced. And I didn't even remember this being introduced in the fall, or in the summer, June 18th, actually late spring, technically. And this is the one that is under the Telecommunications Act and under the auspices of the Minister of Public Safety. We also have Bill C9, which we all know, that's the one about the cultural symbols. But before we unbundle these, and we get your expert opinion on why these are dangerous, do you anticipate there being like a third piece of legislation here that's possible to see?
Well, certainly we're seeing a lot of bills coming out all at once that are very rapidly pushing Canada towards being becoming a police state where the government has very tight control over what you see and hear and read, and what you do not see and hear and read. The combined effects are terrifying. You got Bill C2, which they called the Strong Borders Act. It should be called the Strong Surveillance Act. There's some good parts of Bill C2 that strengthen our borders, which is something Canadians want. Most Canadians do not accept the idea that foreigners, non-Canadians, are just entitled to cross our borders and move into Canada and start living here. It's as a sovereign nation, we control our own borders. So there's some positive aspects to Bill C2, but there's a whole bunch of surveillance aspects to Bill C2 that give more power to police. They give government officials powers over electronic service providers, which is just anybody. You and I, the Justice Center and Krayden's Right, independent media, we are electronic service providers, right? So it's pretty much everybody. So you got Bill C2, Authorized Access to Information Act, giving government officials all kinds of surveillance powers, the right to demand documents without a search warrant. Okay, so C2 is terrifying. Then you get C8, where in the name of national security, which of course is a legitimate goal that all Canadians can get behind, we want to protect ourselves from foreign terrorists, domestic terrorists. We want to have security. We want a government that fights crime. So the goal is legitimate, but this authorizes the Minister of Public Safety to demand that an internet provider cut off the internet of an individual. It can be used to silence you or me or anybody else if you are, if the government really dislikes what you're saying. They can use that power to silence you and kick you off the internet. That's Bill C8. That's really scary. Bill C9 is the bill that attacks there you go. This is Liberal Bill C8 allows the government without trial or a warrant to issue an order banning internet providers from providing any service to any specified person, prohibiting the disclosure of the order's existence. So keep it secret. So all of a sudden, David Krayden's no longer on the internet, but nobody's allowed to know why. You can't get your
incredible. That's incredible. That is like Soviet Russia.
This is Soviet Russia, Nazi Germany type of legislation. It needs to be said. Yeah. And then C9 is undermines our freedom of expression in a number of ways. So I don't know which one you want to talk about first, David, but it's terrible. Like they're all coming all at once. And then you have the Online Harms Act, formerly Bill C63. They might bring that one back. That was a terrible piece of legislation. It died only because we had an election. The NDP was going to join the Liberals and vote it into law.
Yeah, well, that's but what I'm guessing here, and I think it's Sean Fraser's inability as a minister. He has failed at every ministry, and I don't want to get into an ad hominem attack on Sean Fraser. It's too easy a target, but I think he's over his head on this. There's so much happening, but I do believe we're not going to get just two pieces of anti-free speech. We're going to get a third, because clearly in that news conference, Sean Fraser alluded to another bill which sounded exactly like the Online Harms Act. So we've got this Cybersecurity Act under the Public Safety Minister, who is, of course, grossly incompetent. This is the same guy who said the gun law's unmanageable and never going to work, but is up there every day defending it. So I think we're going to get the cybersecurity bill, which you just pointed out, is going to make it basically anything you say, the government can tell you you're off the air, and you can't tell anybody why you're off the air. You have to keep your mouth shut. We've got this bill C9, which is all about hateful symbols. It really comes down to that for me, having read that. And I thought, my God, how are we about to define that? And we've got a third bill on the horizon sometime in the fall that is going to be another Online Harms Act. So I think if we thought it was bad under Justin Trudeau, where we had just the Online Harms Act, Bill C-63, to deal with, the Carney government has made it threefold. We've got three pieces of Online Harms Act coming at us. And I think this is incredible for a government that is supposed to be tackling economic issues. They've got a growing deficit. They've got increasing trade problems. They've got ballooning government employee problems. This is a government that's completely out of control with spending, but they've got lots of time to talk about how they're going to abridge and erode and possibly completely abrogate our freedom of speech. So do you think it's possible? And I just want to start there. Then we can get into Bill C8 and C9. We know the Online Harms Act is going to be identical, but do you think it's possible if there's another one coming?
Well, the Online Harms Act, if they bring it back the same way as what it was first introduced in, I think it was 2024, early 2024.
It was. Yeah.
There's a provision in there where a judge could order you under house arrest and wearing an ankle bracelet and without you being convicted of a crime. So there was a provision in there where if your neighbor thinks that you are about to commit a hate speech crime, the neighbor can go to court and potentially, I mean, the judge might turn down the request, but potentially you could have all these restrictions placed on you, including jail time if you violate the restrictions. I don't. It's so heinous to have sort of like a thought crime or a pre-crime punishment to take away your liberty and place you under house arrest because you might commit a crime in the future. That is so totalitarian. And if they bring back C-63, it'll be a different number. But yeah, the Online Harms Act, C-63, if they bring that back, I'll be looking to see if they still have that provision, because that's got to be one of the worst aspects of it. But the whole thing is terrible. And these laws duplicate what's already there. Child pornography is already illegal. It's already criminal to possess it, distribute it. Revenge porn, don't even want to describe what that is, but that's already illegal. Intimidating, bullying children can be, depending on the nature of it, can also be criminal already. And now with C9, you've got, we're going to protect access to houses of worship, which sounds like a great idea. It's already illegal to obstruct somebody. If there is a Jew wanting to go into a synagogue, or a Muslim wanting to go into the mosque, or a Christian wanting to go into a church, if you physically impede that person, or if you utter threats and threaten to harm them, that's already a crime. So a lot of this is duplicative. We don't need more laws in Canada. We don't. Better enforcement of some would be great, but we don't need more legislation.
No, you've said that, and that's of course how they sold it the last time. This was about protecting children. This was about protecting women from revenge porn, and the criminal code already has laws and statutes doing that.
Or protecting men from revenge porn. That could go both ways.
This government doesn't probably want to even acknowledge that exists, But of course, yeah, these laws exist. It was never about protecting anybody. It was about seizing control of freedom of speech, like this liberal government has always wanted to do. But you have said, and when I last heard you in person here in Ottawa, and you were talking about this bill, and you so correctly assessed it as being basically hate means whatever the government decides in the end. It constitutes hate, because what is hate? And when I looked at this new bill, Bill C9, and it's all about hateful symbols. And I said, good God, how are they going to enforce that? Because once again, the hate of a symbol is in the eye of a beholder. And okay, we can all agree that the swastika is a hateful symbol, but are we going to eradicate it from books, from the cover of books? Does that mean William L. Shirer's The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich will no longer be on library shelves because it prominently has a swastika on the cover and the spine? I have 3 copies of it in my house here. And you think about the hundreds of millions of photographs taken of the Third Reich where swastika flags are prominent. Somebody might be offended by that book in the library, and therefore we have to remove it, or we have to start censoring all of this material so it's not offensive. And once again, for me, it comes down to, sorry if you're offended. This is part of history. It's there. This was a symbol that was used. Yeah, it was an evil regime, but if we pretend it never happened, we're going to get more evil regimes. This is why there are so many documentaries about Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany. And if we start censoring everything, like YouTube does, for instance, with historical films now. I was watching a film recently on the Holocaust, and all of the incriminating evidence was blocked out of the video. So you can watch it and say, I'm sorry, I don't see what they did wrong, because the evidence is all gone. And that to me is where this is going. It's going to be censoring history. It's going to be censoring any symbol that somebody might find offensive. I think it's going to be legal chaos, because some people find the Jewish flag, the Israeli flag offensive. Some people would say, "Oh, that offends me." Some people are offended by the Palestinian flag. Some people are offended by this symbol, and I don't know where it's going to begin and end. And I think it's going to be unenforceable, but it could end up with an absolute disaster of a country. And I think that to me is where Bill C9 is taking us. What do you think?
Well, it does carve out an exception for, you could display the swastika for purposes of journalism, art, religion, and education. So there is an exception carved out. So, you know, the Mr. Shirer's Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, the book, you know, can still have a swastika on it, and you could probably carry that book down the street, and you know, that might be okay. But this bill is hugely problematic with, as you mentioned, David, the whole concept of hate. When we have a law, you know, hate speech means speech that they hate, and it's so subjective. And it's almost comical to see them grasping at straws trying to define hate. Bill C9 tries to clarify, and it says that, and I get this. This is from the bill. Feelings of disdain and dislike are okay. That's not hateful. But feelings of detestation and vilification are hateful. If you can mock, ridicule, humiliate, offend, and hurt the feelings of somebody, that is not hate speech. Bill C9 spells that out. So you can dislike, disdain is okay. You can discredit, humiliate, hurt, offend, mock, and ridicule somebody. That's not necessarily hate speech. However, if you cross this invisible line that's, you know, somewhere out in the sand, somewhere there's this line that if you cross over into vilification and detestation, that's not allowed. So it's almost comical trying to, they can't even define it because it is an emotion. But some really bad aspects of Bill 9 include the current hate speech laws. If somebody's going to be prosecuted for hate speech, there's a review by the Attorney General of the province. Okay. And that's usually not the case. Usually it's the local police, local Crown prosecutors. They decide, and they don't take everything up to the Attorney General of the province. Right. And rightfully so. There's law enforcement would come to a grinding halt. If you think about the thousands of criminal charges, you know, in a country of 40 million people, But there was an exception for the hate speech prosecutions. If somebody was going to be prosecuted, it had to be reviewed by the Attorney General. So there's a higher authority would look at this just to make sure that this wasn't just policemen's subjective feelings, whatever. That's going to be scrapped. So now the local police, local Crown prosecutors can prosecute whomever they want for hate speech without there being a review by higher authority. That's a big problem. The other thing that is deceptive about this is that the Canadian judges already have the power to impose a harsher sentence if a crime was motivated by hate. That's already on the books. But what they're doing now is that the whole sentencing structure can increase. So instead of a maximum 2 years, it becomes maximum 5 years. Instead of maximum 14 years, it becomes life in jail. So there's new authority for judges to increase a sentence dramatically because of the involvement of hate, which builds on an existing power that they already have.
Well, my concern, and I brought up the William L. Shirer book, I suppose almost rhetorically, because I know there's a provision in the Act to exempt scholarly literature, like historical literature, but I don't for a minute trust that, because I think the onus will eventually be on the person accused of hate to prove it's not being hateful. And I think that will gradually be eroded, if not immediately. But you talk about the sentencing here, and here's the inimitable Sean Fraser talking about sentencing. And once again, he appears to be a minister not quite within his depth.
Five included offence is 5 years or more, but less than 10 years. 14 years if the maximum term of imprisonment is the included offence is 10 years or more, but less than 14 years, and life if the maximum term of imprisonment for the included offence is 14 years or more, and up to imprisonment for life. Okay, so sorry, what is there a question?
Can you tell us what they are?
Oh yeah, you want to know each of the different sentencing guidelines?
That'd be nice.
Yeah, sure. So let me flip open to the specific page.
I think they're on symbols.
What's that?
I think they want to know the symbols.
Oh, just on symbols. Yeah, so I think we're dealing with a two-year penalty. So, sorry, I'm looking at different things. Let me deal with the hate penalty first. So if you're found guilty of an indictable offence, a maximum penalty under the hate crime, it will be a 5 years. If the maximum term of imprisonment for the included offence is 2 years or more, but less than 5 years. 10 years if the maximum term of imprisonment is included offence is 5 years or more, but less than 10 years. 14 years if the maximum term of imprisonment is the included offence is 10 years or more, but less than 14 years, and life if the maximum term of imprisonment for the included offence is 14 years or more, and up to imprisonment for life. Intimidation, where are we here? Would be, if you're guilty of an indictable offence, you'd be liable to imprisonment for a term of not more than 10 years. I've now skipped past the hate symbols piece. My apologies.
Astounding.
I want to jump in on the hate symbols thing. The hammer and sickle communist symbol is not, you can display that without risking jail time. So that kind of shows there's an ideology behind C9, because the communist hammer and sickle was the symbol, it was the banner under which communists in Russia and China and Vietnam and Cambodia and other countries have murdered tens of millions of people. If you were to look at it, you don't want to, comparisons always, get us into trouble. But I mean, the number of people murdered by communist regimes is astounding, and it's bigger than what happened in the 6 years of the Second World War. In any event, it's just kind of interesting that the swastika gets banned as a hate symbol, which is also problematic because there are Buddhist and Hindu Canadians who display a swastika on the outside of their house. I've seen them, swastikas on the outside of the houses, and they're not hateful. They have nothing to do with the Nazis in Germany in the 1930s. It's an ancient Sanskrit symbol for prosperity and good fortune. And so I hope the police are going to exercise discretion appropriately and not start arresting Buddhists and Hindus for displaying a swastika on the outside of their home, which they do in Canada and all over the world. It's an ancient religious symbol. So yeah, it's very ideologically. The other ideology you see in Bill C9 is that the minister says that he's introducing it because of the rising anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, transphobia, and homophobia rising. Okay, that's the pretext. He says nothing about the dozens of Christian churches that were burned to the ground, set ablaze by arson, utterly destroyed in Canada. We have well over 100. If you add in the burned to the ground, destroyed by arson, plus vandalized and desecrated, we have well over 100 churches in Canada that have been on the receiving end of arson and vandalism. And if even arson, which is obviously worse than just vandalism, dozens of churches burned to the ground. He just says nothing about that. Nothing. It's all about it's anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, transphobia, and homophobia. That these are, these are the problems. Says nothing about Christian churches being burned to the ground.
Well, that's an excellent point. And of course, as I pointed out, when the U.S. Pastor, evangelist, musician Sean Foyt was touring Canada, he was kicked out of so many public places. No freedom of religion for Christians, for evangelical Christians especially. It was actually, they threatened a Montreal church. They fined a Montreal church $10,000 for hosting him. Nothing about that from Mark Carney. And you're quite right. First of all, the swastika, yes, pre-existed the Nazis for thousands of years. But what really concerns me here is that we talk about Islamophobia, transphobia, homophobia, and yet these are things the government actively is subsidizing in terms of any sort of backlash. And we have a government that says, forget Pride season, every day of the year it should celebrate Pride. So I don't know where this homophobia is coming from. Certainly, I'm not seeing any evidence of it. Quite the reverse.
But it's all
public subsidization of Pride festivals, Pride flags, Pride everything. So it's absolutely absurd.
And people are, if the law is properly enforced, and if it's not, that's a serious problem that needs to be addressed. But whether, regardless of your sexual feelings, sexual proclivities, assault is illegal in Canada. It's illegal to assault somebody. Any physical contact, even minor physical contact, is criminal. It's an assault. So the law just needs to be applied, and it needs to be applied equally, so everybody is protected by it. So assault is illegal. Uttering threats is illegal. If I were to say to you, David, I want you to do this or that, and if you don't do what I want, I'm going to burn your house down. Right then and there, that's a crime. So uttering threats is a crime. And if gay people or transgender people or whatever are assaulted, or if there's threats uttered against them, they deserve the same protection of the law as everybody else. So if we have a problem with unequal law enforcement, then that should be addressed. But we don't need additional laws when it's already illegal to assault somebody. It's already illegal to threaten somebody. It's already illegal to obstruct somebody. It's a criminal code offense to interfere with the lawful use and enjoyment of property. So if you're walking towards your car and I go stand between you and your car and prevent you from getting into your car, I could be criminally charged for that. That's a criminal offense. If people making their way into a house of worship, if you obstruct them or threaten them, it's already a crime. So you have lots of laws on the book. This is just a lot of virtue signaling where the government wants to be seen to be doing something when maybe, the solution, I don't know if depending on which province, maybe the police don't have enough resources to enforce existing laws. I don't know. I suppose that would vary from city to city and from province to province.
But this is all part and parcel of the same mentality that says we need hate crimes to begin with. Why does a democracy need hate crimes? Why does a country that supposedly admires and respects free speech need something called a hate crime or hate speech? Because freedom of speech means I can say something hateful. Freedom of speech means I can say something offensive. As you pointed out, hate and offense is in the eye and the ear of the beholder. But if we really have free speech, it's for speech that could be construed as hateful or offensive. That's what free speech is all about. This government doesn't get that. And we don't need more hate crimes legislation. It's embarrassing. It doesn't matter if you had some motivational reason for the murder you committed beyond you hated the person, whether it was based on gender, whether it was based on sexuality, whether it was based on ethnicity. Does it really matter? The crime is the killing, or the crime is the attack or the assault. Why can't we get back to some kind of common sense towards this instead of insisting the crime has to have something to do with your motivation based on race or sexuality or ethnicity? It's insanity to me. And we need to be moving away from these laws, not in reinforcing them.
Well, politicians never take away our rights and freedoms without offering a nice sounding pretext. And this is governments. Some politicians have been saying this. They've been talking about this for decades. And we got to protect you from hate. And of course, it sounds lovely, right? If you don't really think about it too much, you hear it. Oh yeah, we should all, we should just live in this happy world where there's no hate. So, makes sense. The government should protect us from hate. So we're going to outlaw hate speech. Superficially, it sounds great. The problem is who gets to decide what is hate, right? And it's going to be the politicians with or bureaucrats. It doesn't even matter who it is, right? I don't think people would want to live in a country where I get to determine what's hateful and ban it. That really gives me control over everybody's speech, because then I could say, well, this is hateful and this is hateful and that's hateful. And even scarier is when the government wants to protect us from disinformation and misinformation. There's an interesting clip I saw of John Kerry, the American Democrat politician who ran for president in 2004. He lost to George Bush, and he said the First Amendment, right, the free speech protection in the U.S. Constitution, stands in the way of government censoring disinformation.
And I think the dislike of and anguish over social media is just growing and growing and growing. And it's part of our problem, particularly in democracies, in terms of building consensus around any issue. It's really hard to govern today. You can't, there's the referees we used to have to determine what's a fact and what isn't a fact are kind of, been eviscerated to a certain degree. And people go and that people self-select where they go for their news or for their information. And then you just get into a vicious cycle. So it's really, really hard, much harder to build consensus today than at any time in the 45, 50 years I've been involved in this. And there's a lot of discussion now about how you curb those entities in order to guarantee that you're going to have, some accountability on facts, et cetera. But look, if people go to only one source and the source they go to is sick and, has an agenda and they're putting out disinformation, our First Amendment stands as a major block to the ability to be able to just, hammer it out of existence. So to implement change.
That's the big trick and the really, really tricky question right now, because there is out there a deliberate undermining of mainstream media. There are the conspiracy theorists, there are the social media drivers who are trying to do everything they can to keep people in their little filter bubbles, to prevent people from actually agreeing on a common set of facts, the way, the CBC and CTV, when they were our only sources of news,
And he's entirely correct. Yes, it does, because he's kind of said the First Amendment, the free speech protection, is an obstacle because there are these people out there that are spreading disinformation. Not him, of course. He would never spread disinformation or misinformation. But there's these other bad people that are spreading disinformation that the government should be able to blow them out of the water, kind of shut them down. But the government can't do that because of the constitutional provision. I thought, yeah, well, you know what? He's entirely correct. It's rather sinister what he's saying. But it's the same problem that we face here, where the government will sell to, and there's some naive, gullible people that'll actually buy into this and go, "Oh yeah, government's going to protect me from misinformation and disinformation." I mean, no, that now government controls what you see and hear and read. And so that's really scary too. Watch out for that government protecting you from disinformation, misinformation.
Well, I think when all is said and done, if we get three pieces of legislation here aimed against free speech, aimed for censorship, Canada, I don't think will be much different from the United Kingdom, which right now is censorship capital of the democratic world. You're thrown in jail for any reason. The government decides you're being spiteful, hateful, inciting anger, and it goes on. And the judges have just been deliriously happy about this. And they actually had to empty the prisons and murderers, let them out early so they could find room for all of these, as they call them, keyboard warriors, who are not necessarily in tune with the government narrative on things, especially mass migration, which is the government's very touchy about in the UK. But of course, Keir Starmer had the gall to sit down with Donald Trump. And by the way, I aired that particular interview with John Kerry. I think it was at a symposium with the WEF, I think, if I recall. But when Keir Starmer was sitting down with Donald Trump, he had the gall to suggest there's no censorship in the UK. After all, this is
We've had free speech for a very, very long time in the United Kingdom, and it will last for a very, very long time.
A few moments later.
Videos that have been posted onto social media, including those that were made this morning.
This morning, what made this morning?
And of my officers that have been round this evening.
Right, and
so I'm here to kindly ask that you remove said videos from social media. If you do
no,
so,
I don't think I've broke the law, so I don't think I will.
the home of the Magna Carta. And we've had a long history of free speech. And I felt like saying, yeah, Keir, you ended that history about a year ago.
You ended the history. Yeah. You had a long history of free speech in the United Kingdom. Well, it's scary, and it seems that Canada is heading in that direction. Certainly, the surveillance state. If you take Bill C-2 with the Authorized Access to Information Act, and government officials, not even just police officers, can compel electronic service providers to turn over information. And you've got the Bill C-8 with the power of the government to order a telecommunications provider, which again is just telecommunications. I was looking at it this morning, is defined in the Act. It's basically any non-paper communication, anything with wire, radio, internet. It's everything except for like a hard copy, paper and pen. So that's what telecommunications is. So it includes the internet. And then as you put up on your screen a few minutes ago, that the government can order a telecommunications provider to cut off, to ban the internet provider from providing any service to any specified person. So, if Mark Carney doesn't like Dave Krayden or John Carpay or anybody else, they can order us kicked off the internet. That is really scary. Now, naive and gullible people who don't understand that government can be a force for evil as well as a force for good, they say, but the government would never do that because they're all really nice. Well, that's just ignorance of history. When governments have extraordinary powers, they use those extraordinary powers. You cannot, it's just utter foolishness and naivete to pass laws that give government huge, vast powers over the lives of citizens and then trust that government will never abuse or misuse that power. That is so stupid. So the law has to be written in a way that it minimizes the power of government and keeps it within narrow channels to reach a worthwhile target. And all of these bills coming out now, they fall short of that standard.
Well, I've become increasingly libertarian in my outlook, and I'm an ex-military person. I worked on Parliament Hill. I was always very, very establishment in my outlook because I said, well, the authorities are always going to be on my side, and the police will be on my side. The government, basically, whether it's liberal or conservative, they're going to be on my side as a God-fearing, law-abiding Canadian citizen. Then I realized during the Freedom Convoy that no, the government, the police were not on my side anymore. The military wasn't on my side anymore. And what was my side? Well, it was just sort of an average Canadian who pays his taxes, obeys the law, but just doesn't happen to agree with the Liberal Party narrative. And that makes me an enemy of the state. And so now the full force of government can be used against me, as it's being used right now, or could potentially be used against a ostrich farm in Edgewood, BC, simply because they're saying, go ahead, prove your point, test our ostriches, see if they are really sick. The government won't do that. They say, we don't have to do anything, except we don't follow the rule of law anymore. We make the rule of law case by case. We decide what's right and wrong, and you just have to abide by it. So what concerns me here, and I don't want to take too much more of your time. I could talk to you forever, John, but what concerns me is that there's going to be so much hate crime legislation on the books by the time the Carney government is expired, that there's not going to be any willingness on the part of a new conservative government, which I think we'll eventually get to someday, to repeal any of it. And we're going to be left with all of this grudge in our legal system, our judicial system, and we're never going to get rid of these hate laws. Because, and before you answer, I wanted to mention this. When the Attorney General of the United States, Pam Bondi, in the wake of the Charlie Kirk killing, suggested that maybe the United States should have hate speech legislation, there was a huge uproar from Charlie Kirk's most ardent supporters, the MAGA people, the Republican Party supporters. They said, forget it. We don't want to be like Canada. We don't want hate speech crime in this country. Freedom of speech means you have the freedom to say hateful, offensive things. That's what the First Amendment's all about. I don't know if we have that in Canada. Free speech is very vaguely defined in our Charter of Rights. We don't even have property rights in our Constitution. But do you think there's going to be sufficient pushback to say, let's get rid of this nonsense and let's really have free speech in Canada?
It's really up to Canadians, and certainly our protections here are not as robust. We've got some pretty muddled. We've got some good Supreme Court of Canada decisions, but they're not overly strong. We had the Quebec comedian who mocked and ridiculed a handicapped boy, which I think is reprehensible speech, but it shouldn't be illegal. He won his case, but that was narrow. That was 5-4. We've got a very mushy decision of the Supreme Court of Canada in the Whatcott case, where it's very mealy-mouthed and it's very vague. This is where they get into these weird, trying to define hatred, and it's so you can discredit and humiliate and ridicule and offend people. You can hurt their feelings, you can dislike them, there can be disdain, and that's all okay. That's not hate speech, but don't cross this mysterious line into detestation and vilification. So you get these fairly muddled rulings. The Keekstra ruling of the Supreme Court of Canada, this is decades ago, very narrowly upheld hate speech. Beverly McLaughlin and two other justices, I seem to recall, was a 4-3 decision. You had this very strong dissent that would have actually gotten rid of the restrictions on free speech of the criminal code section 319, the criminal hate speech provisions. They were almost struck down by the Supreme Court of Canada, but there's a narrow 4-3 majority. They were upheld. A good ruling is of the Supreme Court was striking down a provision that it was a criminal code offense to spread false news, which is hugely problematic. Who gets to decide what is false or not? And the Supreme Court actually struck down that. It used to be a criminal code offense in Canada. Spreading false news was criminal, and so that was struck down. So the Supreme Court rulings on free speech in Canada they're a dog's breakfast, and they're not nearly as strong as the American Supreme Court rulings in favor of free speech.
Well, that striking down the false news provision, was that during the Jim Keegstra trial, or was that during the Ernst Zundel trial? Because I know he was charged. That was
Zundel. Zundel defended himself. He was charged because he was a Holocaust denier. He was charged with spreading false news, and his defense was that the law itself was an unjustified violation of freedom of expression, and he won. And the court struck it down, and I agree with the majority of the court. It's an older provision that was actually, the original purpose of it was to protect the great men of the realm. That was the purpose, was to, because if somebody was bad-mouthing the king or the nobles, and that was obviously false if you said something bad about the king and the nobles, so spreading false news, that was the origins of it. And but practically speaking, right, you get into this, who is to decide what is false or not? In a free country, you and I and everybody else, as adults, we get to make up our own minds about what's true and false. We don't have the government stepping in on our behalf and determining what's true and false. And in conclusion, I just want to play this clip from the public safety minister, who, of course, is the man in charge of Bill C-8, which another piece of censorship legislation, which you described in detail. But listen to his response to this conservative.
He had to say, "This is the mandate I was given by the Prime Minister to complete this and not revisit this." It sounds like he doesn't even believe in this. So if the public safety minister doesn't believe in this program, why are we spending $742 million taxpayer dollars to keep it going?
Here, here. Great. The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, I've addressed this issue a number of times, but let me just make it very personal, Mr. Speaker. The last 4 months in this role as Minister of Public Safety, I've received a great deal of vitriol from the gun lobby, Mr. Speaker. If you go into my social media accounts, you will see hundreds, if not thousands, of comments of hatred that's coming through the gun lobby, Mr. Speaker. What the party opposite is doing is reinforcing that. We have a serious plan to ensure that guns are off our streets. That's why we...
Oh, and I won't go in. He goes on about his gun plan, which he doesn't even believe in. But immediately he appeals to the hate speech. And do you believe for a minute that, I think he said thousands of people sent hate speech missives to him?
Yeah, it's a disgusting trend. You see this all the time. You criticize somebody, and it's called harassment. So somebody comes out and says, David, your opinions are wrong on these issues and for these reasons, and then it's like, oh well, that's harassment, is to disagree with somebody, and it's really sad, because if you call hateful anytime somebody says something that you disagree with, and you start calling it hate, it diminishes the meaning and the value of the word. It's like racism, right? If everything is racist, then nothing is racist. So if you just very quickly, easily do these cheap shots and run around calling everything racist that you disagree with, it takes away the power of the word to be useful and beneficial in the right circumstances. So yeah, unfortunate that the minister regards criticism as hateful.
Well, and of course, this is the minister in charge of Bill C-8. So I'm not assured in any way that we're going to get any due process here. But John Carpay, Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, you and your organization do so much to help those who couldn't help themselves otherwise, and when they're attacked by government overreach. I applaud your group every day as much as I can. I've supported your group for many, many years. I'll continue to do so because you do an invaluable service, not just to Canadians who need your assistance, but to Canadian freedom, and especially freedom of speech, which I think basically is foundational to our democracy, probably the most important freedom we have. And we lose that, I think we lose our democracy. And I want to thank you for the hard work you do, the people you represent. I don't think there's ever been a cause you've represented I didn't believe in wholeheartedly. So I really want to thank you for the work you do. And thank you for spending as much time as you did with me this morning. And God bless you in your work.
Well, thanks for having me on your show. Thanks for the kind words about the Justice Center. And have a great rest of the day, David.
Okay. Thank you, John. Bye for now. That was John Carpay, Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. Fantastic group. We'll have more information about them in the description. Support them financially if you can, but support them every day in terms of what you say, because they're supporting you. And we'll have more in a second. Yes. Thanks for joining us today, folks. And please visit the store. We have some great merchandise. It's there for you. And we take you, if there's something you'd like to see in the store, let us know in the comments or email me, davidkrayden@hotmail.com. I do respond to emails. And thank you for your support. God bless. Godspeed to all of you. And we'll be back again tomorrow morning. Thank you for sharing this station with your friends and family. Thank you for hitting that like button, because I tell you, we are fighting back in a way I've never had to before, because I am going to keep this station on the air. I am going to keep fighting for freedom. I'm going to keep fighting for justice and truth, because that's all I have left. And I am damn determined to resist this Carney government in any way possible, as it encroaches upon our individual freedom. And it will continue to do that, mark my words. And that's why we're here today. I'll be back again tomorrow, same time, same place, 10 a.m. This has been David Krayden, broadcasting live from our nation's capital in Ottawa. Thank you for watching. We'll see you again tomorrow.
Can't handle the truth.
Resolve to resist